Friday, 6 p.m., event barn, fairy lights, shiplap, a room that worships aesthetic. Aunt Tessa, black apron, crooked paper name tag, slides in through the service hall with a tray of iced tea and a plan. They think Aunt is poor. They think Aunt is quiet. They seat Aunt by the dish pit and hand Aunt a grocery gift card, a small allowance. And there's a PDF they didn't mean for Aunt to read. Seat Aunt by service hall. Crop tight on family. Encourage independent living. Will help monthly. 53 doesn't mean fragile. Aunt runs 6 regional budgets and lifts her own luggage. Power doesn't always walk in the front door. It pushes a cart and hears everything. So today, Aunt wears the apron on purpose. She'll pour the tea, she'll smile at the clipboard, then she'll set down one blue folder, the kind with quiet numbers and loud consequences, and ask one calm question. How long did you imagine this allowance would last? When the room goes still, Aunt won't raise her voice. She'll raise the mirror. Because love isn't leverage. Family isn't a seating chart. And the person you tried to crop out might be the one who paid for the room. Stay with me. The gift card was the beginning. The boundary is the story. I tied on a plain black apron and clipped a paper name tag to my hoodie that said in Sharpie letters, just a little crooked, Tessa Kitchen Volunteer. The barn doors at Brookstone slid open with a groan that felt theatrical, sunlight pouring across polished concrete and 100 tiny fairy lights that someone had meticulously zip-tied along the rafters. If you've never seen an event barn on a perfect Midwestern Saturday, it looks like Pinterest married a county fair and agreed to only have photogen children. Shiplap walls, mason jars, white folding chairs with blush pink sashes. The dessert table had its own chalkboard labeled "Love is Sweet," as if sugar needed a PR team. I balanced a tray of iced tea glasses on my left hand and eased through a flock of bridesmaids practicing a ribbon game. I caught a snippet of conversation about which shade of nude heels counted as tasteful. It was like listening to swans judge other swans. The apron didn't bother me. Serving never has. I was raised to understand that not all power walks in through the front door. Sometimes it pushes a cart down the service hall and quietly hears everything. My niece, Maddie, was getting married in 8 weeks. The shower was the warm-up act, the runway where people practiced who they planned to be for the big day. Maddie isn't my daughter by blood, but when my sister, Claire, died 12 years ago, in the kind of quiet way that still makes me check doors twice, I became the woman who packed the lunches, zipped backpacks, taught long division on the back of pizza boxes, and learned where Target hides the clearance end caps for school supplies in late September. We weren't glossy. We weren't tragic either. We were steady. Steady and practical, and good at finding rotisserie chickens on sale at Costco. And all that time, I learned there are 2 kinds of people when a room fills with special occasion. The kind who make it beautiful so everyone can breathe, and the kind who make it beautiful so they can control who breathes. My niece's future mother-in-law, Paige Langford, was the second kind. The clipboard at her hip wasn't an accessory. It was doctrine. I saw her before she saw me. Cream slacks, pearl studs, gold watch that probably had a story about being a gift from Stephen on our 10th anniversary. She wielded a stack of place cards like a sheriff shuffling warrants. When her gaze finally landed on my apron, I watched the smile slide just a fraction, the way someone moves a fragile vase to the back of a shelf during an earthquake. "Oh, Tessa," she said, voice all gloss. "What a hands-on touch. Helping in the kitchen?" "I'm happy to serve." And I meant it. It wasn't sarcasm. It was strategy. She lightly patted the underside of my wrist. Intimacy without intimacy. She produced a shiny envelope and pressed it into my palm. It was a gift card to a local grocery chain, the kind of card you give the family across town at Christmas, which is to say, a gesture dressed as kindness, dressed as hierarchy. "Just a small allowance," she whispered. "We thought it might help with gas, and if you could let us handle photo ops and speeches today, it's not personal, we just want a cohesive aesthetic." A cohesive aesthetic. I looked down at my apron, at the Sharpie that had bled through the paper tag and shadowed my hoodie. "I'm happy to help," I said again, because sometimes you need to see a person walk a sentence all the way to its end. The truth is, 3 days earlier, I'd opened my email and found a PDF from the florist addressed to M. Carter. That wasn't meant for me. The subject line, "Langford Family Guidelines Final." I was having coffee at my kitchen table, the morning light making a rectangle on the laminate like a small stage, and I read bullet points that never expected to be read outside of their own arrogance. "Seat Aunt Tessa by the service hall. No mic time. Photography note. Crop tight on immediate family. Post-wedding. Encourage Aunt to consider independent living at Willow Creek Senior Apartments. Offer monthly help so Maddie can focus on new family." I read that last line 3 times. Encourage Aunt to consider independent living. I'm 53. I run 6 regional budgets for a logistics company that moves products you touch every day. I deadlift my own luggage. The audacity made a sound in my throat that, if you were uncharitable, could be mistaken for a laugh. But I wasn't in the mood to perform for my coffee maker. I sat still. I let the words hit. I let the ache and anger and, yes, a sliver of heartbreak slide into my bones like cold water. Then I did what Midwestern women do when the room tilts. I got practical. I called the venue manager, a young woman named Kylie, with a ponytail too high to be cynical, and asked kindly to move my name from the guest list to the volunteer roster. "I'll bring my own apron. Black will match your aesthetic." She didn't question me. People rarely do when you sound like you know exactly what you're doing. At the barn, I carried drinks and pretended not to overhear Paige instructing the photographer to keep the vibe light and tonal. I pretended not to notice that the place card with my name on it sat at a round table near the door to the dish pit, next to a stack of folded linen like I might be expected to take one and start ironing. I pretended not to mind when twice a coordinator gestured me away with 2 fingers when I drifted to the head table, the way you shoo a cat off a counter. Maddie floated in, sunshine in a polka dot dress, freckles I'd fretted over with sunscreen since she was little. She hugged me, eyes bright. "You look cute," she said. "I like the apron." It's on theme. I'm your behind-the-scenes girl. The truth is, I hadn't told many people what I do for work. I like quiet. Quiet lets you watch. Quiet lets you choose when to speak. At the office, I sign off on numbers that make men twice my age sit up straighter. I run budgets with more zeros than the church bulletin will ever see. I built my life so that my niece could say yes to her future without first asking permission from her past. But that day, I wasn't sure the room understood the difference between kindness and control. And if the room didn't know, I needed to tell it. The shower began with a game about celebrity couples, which I lost on principle, and then the gift started. Ribbons curled like inside jokes. People said, "You'll use this forever," about things no one uses forever. It was all sweet. It was all fine. Paige tapped her glass halfway through, her smile bright as a dental ad. A work from the mother of the groom. She told a polished story about legacy and taste, about starting a life on the right foot, about the importance of registering for cookware that wouldn't chip the way cheaper brands do. She mentioned a Napa trip in a sentence that wore sunglasses. She did not say my niece's name once. When the clapping died, I set down my pitcher. I don't gravitate to microphones. I spent my life making sure other people get to use them, but a lifetime of spreadsheets has taught me this. When numbers don't line up, someone needs to ask questions with a steady voice. I walked to the far end of the head table so I didn't look like an interception, and spoke to Paige in a tone that could be mistaken for small talk. This allowance, how long were you imagining? Her relief was visible, like she thought we were finally getting to the part where I honored her plan. Well, she began, we thought 200 a month until you're more settled, and perhaps we could help you connect with Willow Creek. It's darling. Cards on Thursdays, shuttle to Target. It would free Maddie up to pour into her new family. Pour, I repeated. That's a strong verb for a 26-year-old who's been pouring into everyone since 4th grade. She blinked and said, I didn't mean... I know exactly what you meant. It came out soft. The softness surprised even me. I turned to Kylie, who'd been hovering nearby long enough to learn how to read a room. Would you bring the blue folder from your office, the one on Carter Family Fund letterhead? Murmurs rustled like tissue paper in a quiet church. Kylie returned with a slim binder. I flipped it open to the sponsor page and angled it so the table could see. Paige, do you see that line? The one covering today's entire invoice? That's me. Carter Family Fund is my little side project. Quiet money. Local impact. Paige laughed lightly, brittle on the edges. That's not... Are you saying you paid for? For everything, today. The room, the rentals, the little jars that keep pretending to be vases. I did it because I love Maddie, and because I remembered throwing her 7th birthday party in my 2-bedroom apartment with a sheet cake and tap water, and she acted like it was Disney. The room went still, the way rooms do when someone moves the story off a script. Maddie's hand found her throat. A bridesmaid set down a tiny fork like it might be a gavel. And since we're being transparent, I continued, I received a PDF labeled Langford Family Guidelines that suggested seating me by the service hall, cropping me out of photos, and this is the part where my jaw actually did drop, encouraging me to consider independent living with a monthly help so your brand stays tidy. A couple of women sucked in breaths they didn't know they were holding. Paige's chin tightened. If her smile were a door, you'd have heard the deadbolt. You're taking that out of context, she said. Which context redeems it? I asked. The part where you rename control as care, or the part where you equate dignity with a seating chart? Across the head table, Colin stood up. He looked young and handsome and uncertain, like a groom in a movie who hasn't yet learned how to hold his own spine. Mom, he said quietly, did you send that? Paige's mouth opened, then closed, then settled on a sentence she could live with. We were brainstorming. You know how Aunt Tessa gets overwhelmed. I run freight budgets across 6 states. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm observant. I pulled a second page from the folder. For the record, I'm also Maddie's trustee. My sister left a small life insurance policy. I've invested it carefully so she'd never have to ask anyone's permission to breathe. That fund will help them buy their first home on their timeline, not yours. Maddie looked at me, tears bright without falling. You never told me. I never needed to know. I wanted you to choose your life because it was yours. Paige folded her arms, pearls catching the light like a constellation labeled control. This is unkind. No, I said, keeping my voice low, steady. What's unkind is calling a woman a burden and handing her a gift card to buy her silence. What's unkind is teaching a son that love is leverage. Kylie, bless her hospitality-trained heart, slipped into the space like a humorist. Would anyone like more lemonade? She asked the room. No one did. They wanted the ending. Here's how this is going to go, I said, not making a show of anything except clarity. The party continues, Maddie opens presents, people eat strawberry shortcake and tell her sweet stories, and when it's over, we reset the expectation. I will be in wedding photos. I will speak if my niece wants me to speak. I will not be negotiated out of my own family. Paige lifted her chin. You can't dictate terms. I'm not dictating. I'm drawing a boundary. If that boundary feels like control to you, ask yourself why a woman saying, I belong, reads as a threat. Silence isn't empty. It's full of what people finally hear. The room exhaled, a soft sound like a flock settling. Colin put his hand on Maddie's shoulder and looked at his mother. We're not cropping anyone out. The party resumed because that's what parties do. Moments later, in the rustle of gift wrap and ahs and someone laughing too loudly at a joke about towels, the pulse of the room came back to normal. It's amazing how quickly grace moves in when control steps back. After the last present, a set of mixing bowls that nested like a family photo, people wandered for coffee refills and leftover macarons. I ducked into the hall to give the room oxygen. When I stepped back, Paige was waiting by the barn door beneath a framed picture of the property at golden hour. Her voice was glass when she spoke. You embarrassed me. I held up a mirror. You did the rest. We only wanted the best. The best would have been assuming we all want the same thing, a marriage that's free of control. I looked at her, not unkindly. You can still turn this around. Kindness is free. You could try it. She didn't answer. I didn't need her to. Not every conversation ends with agreement. Some end with a boundary people don't like but understand. The cleanup crew moved in like a pit stop, and I found myself stacking plates next to a teenager who said, "That was nuts," like it was a compliment. I drove home with the windows cracked an inch and the smell of hay stuck in my hoodie, thinking about the ways women learn to carry rooms, the way the simple act of standing where you belong can look like rebellion to someone who's had their hand on the seating chart for so long it feels like a birthright. Sunday morning was bright in that Midwestern way where the sun seems to vote for you. I walked the loop at Roe Park with the coffee and watched golden retrievers carry sticks like trophies they didn't have to explain. My phone buzzed. Colin's name. I'm sorry, his text read. I told Mom we're setting boundaries. She's upset. But we're not backing down. Proud of you, I replied. Take care of my girl. We will. Also, we want you to give the toast at the rehearsal dinner. You sure? I typed. I only know 2 jokes, and one of them is about shipping pallets. We like pallets, he wrote. See you tonight. That evening, Maddie pulled into my driveway with 2 iced teas and a bag of Target returns rattling like wind chimes. We sat on the stoop and watched a kid on a scooter take corners like he had stock in gravity. The air smelled like fresh mulch and somebody's grill 5 houses down. You didn't have to pay for anything, she said, voice small but steady. I would have loved a sheet cake and paper plates. I know. That's why I wanted to. I bumped her shoulder with mine. And for the record, your 7th birthday sheet cake was the pinnacle of culinary art. People only wish they could replicate that frosting. She smiled and then sobered. Thank you for not letting anyone rename power as love. That's the line we don't cross. Love is not a bribe. It's not a seat assignment. It's showing up when the room is ugly and staying when the photos aren't perfect. She was quiet. Then, can we do a backyard rehearsal? Burgers, grandma's potato salad, those cheap twinkle lights. Now you're speaking my liturgy. We'll borrow tables from the church and make the fancy people eat off paper. She laughed, and the sound was all the permission I needed to go look for extension cords. Monday, I went back to the office where the fluorescent lights and the hum of an old HVAC system say, we're all doing our best with the infrastructure we inherited. My desk is neat on purpose. Clear desk, clear head. The Carter Family Fund folder sat in my briefcase like a question I'd already answered. I didn't start a fund because I wanted to be a savior of any kind. I did it because people had been quiet blessers to me when Claire died and I was 41. Single, broken time and money and attention and faith. The woman at the credit union who stayed late to explain interest. The neighbor who took Maddie to youth group in a minivan with the ceiling sagging. My boss who said, "Work from home for a week. We'll cover it." And meant it. I took the gratitude those moments left and put it in an account that says, "More of that, please." Wednesday night, we had burgers in the backyard and the twinkle lights tingled with the June breeze that smelled like cut grass and somebody's grill vent 5 houses down. We had lawn chairs and paper plates, a blue cooler full of LaCroix and a little bit of beer, and a speaker stuck on a playlist someone made in college. Colin grilled like a man trying to get something right. Maddie put pickles on everything and said, "Don't judge me," which meant, "Please notice that I like what I like." Paige didn't come. She sent a text that said she had a board meeting she couldn't move, which is country club code for I'm upset and pretending I'm not. Her husband, Steven, showed up late in a polo that said he'd once been on a golf trip where everyone wore the same color. He stood beside me near the hostess, cleared his throat, and said, "You embarrassed Paige."
I interrupted a narrative. I said, "She'll be okay." He scuffed his loafer against the paver. "She works hard. She just wants things to be right." "She wants things to look right," I said. "It's not the same." He nodded once, the smallest admission. "We'll see you at the rehearsal. Paige wants to be involved. She can set out forks. I hear that's the path to enlightenment." He smiled despite himself and joined his son at the grill, where he gave a small piece of advice about not pressing the burgers because you'll squeeze the juices out and no one will be impressed by a dry patty no matter what the Instagram filter says. The rehearsal dinner wasn't at a fancy steakhouse like Paige had originally suggested. It was at the church fellowship hall with linoleum floors that remember every potluck since the Nixon administration. We pushed 6 tables together, covered them in butcher paper, and wrote people's names in Sharpie like we were graffiti artists moonlighting as wedding planners. The teenagers hung a banner crooked on purpose. I set out jars of yellow mustard and felt a contentment I wish I could bottle. When it was time to toast, I didn't pretend to be a stand-up comic. I told the story of the first time Maddie cooked dinner for me in middle school. Spaghetti with sauce so salty I drank 2 glasses of water and still woke up thirsty. I told the story of her first job at the library, how she'd come home smelling like paper and dust and 1,000 lives you can borrow for 3 weeks at a time. I told the story of Colin bringing a plant to our Thanksgiving like it was an apology for the world. People laughed. People teared up. It was the sound of a community deciding who they were going to be when it counted. After the official toasting during the part of the night when the room softens and you can talk like humans again, I felt a presence at my elbow. Paige. She wore a navy dress that said "respect me" and a face that begged, "check on me." "I brought potato salad," she said, voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. "No raisins." I heard that's controversial. She attempted a smile. It didn't make it all the way up. "Set it there," I said, pointing to a spot between the coleslaw and the chips. "We're equal opportunity carb loaders." She hovered, then tried again. "I read your sister's obituary. I didn't know she died that young." It was quick. Quicker than we thought it would be. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." She started and stopped like a car that needs a different gear. "I'm not used to being told no." "That's clear," I said. I kept my tone light. It was not my job to push. It was my job to be honest. "I wanted the pictures to look perfect," she said. "Perfect is cheap. Honest is expensive." She breathed out through her nose, a laugh that didn't want to exist and did anyway. "Steven says I should apologize." "Do you want to?" I asked. Another breath, this one like she was trying to inhale an answer. "I don't know. I want to win. That's not the same thing." "No, it's not." She nodded, set down the potato salad, and moved away. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first time I'd seen her speak truth without trying to turn it into a product. I counted it as movement. 2 days later, they stood under an oak tree at a local park with a rental arch so pretty it could have testified in a positive Yelp review. The sky was the color of good china. Maddie wore a simple A-line dress that belonged to no magazine and every Midwest heart. Colin cried at the vows like men do when they let themselves belong to something bigger than their control. The photographer had a shot list, but she had ears too. She heard the undertow of our day. When it came time for family photos, she didn't ask. She waved me in with her whole hand like a traffic cop ushering through an ambulance. We stood shoulder to shoulder. Not flawless, just correct. Paige didn't object. She pressed her lips together, a woman actively fighting a reflex. Later, when people were chasing toddlers with napkins and the DJ played chords that make grandmothers dance like girls, Paige came and stood next to me. "You look nice," I said. "So do you. Navy suits you?"
We watched Colin twirl his wife. "They look happy," she murmured. "They are happy," I said. "It's not a trick of the light." She adjusted a bracelet. "Will you send me the number for the fellowship hall? I think I could help with their pantry drive." "Absolutely," I said. "In every negotiation, you learn the difference between a concession and a step. This was a step." The next week, normal life tried to reassert itself. The bills still came, the cat still threw up on the good rug, work still asked for reports that use words like variance and forecast, and my favorite phrase, material misstatement. I put the blue folder back in my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The world will always be full of clipboards and guidelines and people who think generosity is leverage. My job is simple. Tell the truth, set the boundary, feed the people I love. On Tuesday, I took a half day to drive out to the county courthouse because Maddie realized she'd signed the wrong line on the marriage license, and you don't mess around with that. The clerk had a bob haircut and the patience of a saint who also worked retail. We fixed it. After we ate egg salad sandwiches at a diner tucked behind a gas station where the waitress has been calling people honey since Reagan, and I taught Maddie the life skill of leaving cash for a refill you didn't technically get charged for. It's good to learn the unspoken economy early. On Thursday evening, I found an envelope on my porch. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note that said, in a script made for thank you cards, "I was wrong. I am sorry. I am learning. Paige." And a gift card to the same grocery chain, $100 again, but with it a line, "For your pantry, if that would be all right." It was a tiny, clumsy gesture. It was also the most she'd offered without angles. I texted Kylie to ask if the Brookstone staff wanted to do a canned goods drive, and in 24 hours, I had a photo on my phone of 2 folding tables in the barn stacked with pasta and beans and peanut butter jars big enough to require core strength. I sent Paige the photo and wrote, "Thank you. It helps in both directions." That Saturday morning, I showed up at the Willow Lake Senior Apartments, not because I was moving in, though the card tables in the common room did tempt me, but because their director had emailed to ask if I could give a quick talk on grocery budgeting for seniors whose checks were doing backbends. I stood in front of 50 people who know the price of milk the way we all know the price of our pride. I told them the rule I live by. If you buy store brand peanut butter and no one writes you a poem, keep buying the store brand. Then I rolled a cart through the aisles with a woman named Arlene, who said, "I always buy the cereal with the bird on it because my husband liked it." And we talked about grief at the end of aisle 5. I left with a paper cup of weak coffee and a reminder that most people are doing the best they can with what they were handed. Monday, a certified letter arrived at my office. My stomach did that old habit, an unnecessary flip I trained out of myself 15 years ago when I chose not to live waiting for shoes to drop. I opened it. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was an invitation. The Langford Family Foundation wanted to fund a literacy program at the library where Maddie once shelved books. There was a handwritten P.S. at the bottom in Paige's tidy pen. "We're trying our gifts in the open. If you'll be our mirror, we'll risk it." I sat for a minute. and let the weight of that sentence sit like a warm stone. People don't become different overnight. They become honest, one decision at a time. Honesty doesn't always look like hugging. Sometimes it looks like a budget line labeled, "Do better here." Summer pressed into August with those heavy afternoons that make the world smell like steamed asphalt and grass. I took Maddie and Colin to the office and we set up a bank account together. Not because they needed cash, but because the woman who'd helped me years ago was still there, now with gray in her bun and a voice people listened to because it didn't sell things. We opened a high-yield savings account and set up a transfer that could use time to make a quiet miracle. The following weekend, Paige asked for coffee. We sat outside a place with planters full of petunias that matched her outfit, and she said, "Stephen and I are drafting a will that blesses with strings. If you hear me meddling, remind me that I promised." I said, "That's grave." She looked down, smoothed the napkin with the flat of her hand. "It's terrifying." I said, "Most good things are." She met my eyes. "I still want pretty photos," she confessed. "I still want to curate everything." I said, "Pretty is fine. Curated is art. Controlled is fear dressed up as plan." She nodded, and the nod felt like a hinge being oiled. Fall arrived. The first cold front blew in, and the whole neighborhood smelled like leaves pretending to be candles. I took Maddie into the Johnson County Courthouse to file a name change because she decided to hyphenate and wanted the paperwork to match the promise. We celebrated with chili cheese fries at a diner where the waitress didn't write down our order and still got it right, which is its own holy gift. One Sunday afternoon, we hosted a community chili cook-off in the church lot to benefit the library. Paige showed up with a crock pot labeled Lanford Family Chili. People hovered, suspicious of a chili with a byline. She laughed, cheeks pink, and said, "It's the only way I could stop myself from making 3 kinds and saying they were different." It was the best joke she'd ever made at her own expense. We raised enough money to buy a shelf of new, large-print books that made a man named Walt cry behind his bifocals. Winter pressed in. Snow stitched the sidewalks together. One morning I woke to an ice storm and a text from Stephen asking if I had power. I did, but my neighbor didn't, and by noon, all 3 Lanfords were loading blankets out of their SUV into my neighbor's living room like a scene from a commercial for decent people. They ordered pizza and didn't photograph themselves doing it. That's how I knew the needle had moved from intention to muscle memory. On the first anniversary of the wedding, we all went back to the barn. Not for a party, for a food pantry drive. Kylie hugged me, told me she and her fiancé were saving for a house, and showed me a tattoo on her wrist of a tiny lemon because, she said, "When I'm tempted to be sour, I squeeze." We set up tables by the service hall, my old seat, and people carried in boxes and bags, faces red from the cold and the satisfaction of doing something that matters. Paige stood beside me. I handed her a Sharpie, and she wrote, "Thank you," on a sign with letters too big and too neat, and I didn't correct her. People are allowed to be themselves after they decide to be better. At home that night, I made tea in a chipped mug Claire and I bought at a yard sale when we were young enough to think chipped was a personality. I sat with my feet tucked under a throw blanket and scrolled through photos of a year that had done what it needed to do: strained, stretched, taut, softened. A text buzzed from Paige. "Thank you for holding your line," it read. It taught me where mine should be. "You're welcome," I wrote back. I meant it. It's a relief when people learn the work that's theirs to do. I put my phone face down on the arm of the couch and let the house hum the way old townhouses do when they're settling for the night. The crackle of the heating vents, the refrigerator clicking on like a dependable friend, the distant sound of someone on the sidewalk telling a story into a phone with their whole body. I thought of that first day in the barn with the apron and the name tag and the envelope disguised as generosity. I thought of the phrase cohesive aesthetic and how thin it looks now beside the words we chose later: honest, patient, boundary, family. Kindness doesn't need a microphone, but for the sake of the photo and for the sake of a young couple learning what love is and is not, sometimes you do have to step out from the service hall and stand where you belong. Here's what I know now, with a steadiness I wished I'd had sooner. The world will keep handing you seating charts. People will keep trying to move you 2 chairs down from your own life. You can be polite and still say no. You can be soft and still say stop. You can hold the tray and also hold the line. And when you do, the picture gets better, not because everyone looks perfect, but because everyone who matters is actually in it. Months later, on an ordinary Tuesday in late spring, I was in the checkout line, high V, with a cart that contained the exact math of a week lived decently: chicken thighs, oranges, coffee, the brand of granola bars I pretend not to prefer. A woman behind me tapped my shoulder. "Are you Tessa?" she asked. I nodded. I was at the shower. I've never seen anyone say what needed to be said without turning it into a fight. I went home and told my sister I was done letting my mother buy my yes. "How'd that go?" She smiled. "There was a fight," she said, "but I didn't start it, and I didn't apologize for breathing." She paused. "I just wanted to say thank you for showing me a script I didn't know I was allowed to read from." "Anytime," I said, and meant it. There are a lot of us out there waiting for permission to choose our place. Sometimes all it takes is seeing a woman in a plain black apron say, gently and without apology, "I belong." In the parking lot, the wind did that Kansas thing where it lifts your hair and your mood whether you asked it to or not. I loaded groceries into the trunk and felt a familiar peace settle where the old panic used to live. I thought of Claire. I thought of Maddie. I thought of every young woman who will stand in a room soon with fairy lights and ribbon and someone making a speech about legacy, and I wanted to slide my number into each of their pockets like a secret. Call me if they start talking about allowances. You don't need a sponsor to stand up, but it's nice to know someone paid for the room where you decided to do it. I drove home under a sky that looked like hope had a weather app, the kind that tells you what you already know. Good days aren't guaranteed, but they're always possible when you build the forecast yourself. I parked, carried bags up the walk, and waved at my neighbor who was attempting to outsmart a squirrel. Inside, I set groceries on the counter and listened to the radio talk about a world trying again. I made a simple dinner. I answered a text from Colin asking how to season cast iron. I sent him a heart and a video of my grandmother's trick with the coarse salt and the rag that used to be a t-shirt. I put a check in the mail to the library with large print fund on the memo line. I circled a date on the calendar for a pantry volunteer day. I wrote, "Call Willow Creek, ask about Arlene," on a sticky note. These are small things. They don't trend. They don't perform well, but they stack. They make a life. Before bed, I opened the blue folder one more time, not because I needed to, but because rituals anchor us. The first page still said Carter Family Fund in a font I chose because it looked like handwriting that had grown up. I slid a fresh page into the pocket, a list of names from the food drive, with a note at the top in my script, "Count what counts." Then I closed it and put it away. Kindness doesn't need proof, but in a world that loves receipts, it doesn't hurt to have them. I turned off the lamp. The dark came the way it always does, completely and then kindly, letting your eyes adjust. Tomorrow, I would go to work and teach a young analyst how to spot a material misstatement before it makes a mess at quarter end. Tomorrow, I would check on a neighbor's porch light. Tomorrow, I would text Paige a photo of a literacy corner where a little boy would trace new letters with a finger and someone would whisper, "That's it. That's yours." Tonight, I would sleep in a house that is not big and not fancy, but exactly right, with a quiet in it I purchased with 1,000 good decisions and a handful of loud ones. Tonight, I would thank the room where it happened, the barn with the twinkle lights that taught a family a new grammar for love. Tonight, I would remember that the apron was never the costume. It was the truth. I was there to serve and to say no and to invite people to a table where the food is honest and the rules are simple. Tell the truth. Set the boundary. Feed the people you love and repeat as necessary.